whistleblower should be revealed because the whistleblower gave false stories. I think that the whistleblower gave a lot of false information, and you have to see who the whistleblower is.
I say tonight to the media, do your job and print his name.
So we have a president there and a United States senator. The president added this earlier today, and we quote, "The whistleblower gave false information and dealt with corrupt politician Schiff. He must be brought forward to testify. Written answers not acceptable." This is, of course, the argument being advanced by Congressman Jim Jordan of the Trump camp, among others, even though, of course, we quickly add the president's only responses to the Mueller investigation were written answers through his lawyers. With us to join the conversation tonight, Maya Wiley, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, these days with the New School. So, you know, I got screwed up there. Sorry about that. And David Jolly, a former Republican member of Congress from the great state of Florida, who has since left Congress and the Republican Party, come to think of it. Maya Wiley, I want to talk to you about whistleblowers in general, but I have one more thing to show you. This is former Attorney General Whitaker on Fox News.
Do we break something if we let politics interfere with outing a whistleblower?
Well, a whistleblower is never guaranteed anonymity, and that's, you know, they're guaranteed is that they won't be retaliated against from a workplace in a job standpoint. So, you know, for me, I think this whistleblower does need to publicly testify and be subject to cross-examination, which is consistent with the American legal traditions that we all believe make this a great country.
So, Maya Wiley, is the former chief law enforcement officer of the United States telling the truth there? Is there a confidentiality understanding with whistleblowers?
So there's a yes and a no. So I want to be very straight up with the public on this. The yes part of course, there is an assumption on the part of a whistleblower that's built into what was an Obama-era policy directive that not only that as long as you're going through the process that we have laid out, if you're an intelligence whistleblower, because remember, we are talking about intelligence whistleblowers a little bit different because they're supposed to keep state secrets. Mm-hmm. But what happened is we laid out a process by which people could come forward and say, there's been a law violation or an abuse or gross fraud where we have a national intelligence issue. And they said, as long as you do it through the proper channels, you'll be protected if the Inspector General says it's credible and does not release your name. In other words, it's pretty much up to the Inspector General for the national intelligence community to decide that. Here we had both the national intelligence Inspector General as well as the acting director of national intelligence protecting the whistleblower's name, saying the allegations were credible, and also saying, essentially, by not giving up the name, we think this is the category that it stays confidential. What's more complicated is it is the Inspector General who basically protects the name. There's nothing that really guides us on whether a president of the United States who has the ability to make
can criminalize and out a whistleblower?
Because no one really anticipated a situation where a sitting president would literally try to bring the power of his office down on a public servant who other public servants said credible, followed procedure, did the right thing, we should protect. We never anticipated that. We didn't craft around it. So the one thing that Matthew Whitaker is right about is there's nothing explicitly that says that Donald Trump can't demand it. But that's very different from the policy that surrounds us. The public policy is very clear. We want to protect people who come forward to blow a whistle on something that we would otherwise not know was happening, that was wrong. And when you go through the process, when you follow the law, when you go through your chain of command, and when your chain of command says you did the right thing, You did it for the right reasons. You were credible. How do we put this person in that position?
David Jolly, talk about the long-term consequences of what we're seeing right now involving the president. Also talk about your former party. Was today a day of reckoning? Will tomorrow be? Will we ever know one when we see one?
I don't think we'll ever see self-reckoning, because let's reset the narrative here from the garbage that we heard from Rand Paul. The whistleblower is a patriot, plain and simple, and should be defended by both the president and United States senators for following the law and putting the interests of the national security ahead of any politics that Donald Trump or Rand Paul want to play in this moment. It also is setting up a false argument that you're going to hear from Republicans, and Democrats are not falling for it, and neither should the American people. The status of the whistleblower is inconsequential at this point. Everything he initially presented or she initially presented has been corroborated, has been admitted to by the president, has been corroborated by Mick Mulvaney, confirmed.
Story has moved past.
Confirmed by Bill Taylor, contextualized by Lieutenant Colonel Vindman as a matter of national security. Gary Kasparov, the grandmaster of chess and the Russian political activist, said, the point of disinformation is not just to get people to accept a lie. It's to annihilate truth and to exhaust people's defense of the truth. That's what Donald Trump has done with today's Republican Party. And I shared with your colleague Nicole Wallace earlier today what Republicans' final argument will require is convincing the American people that only Donald Trump tells the truth, that Lieutenant Colonel Vindman is not telling the truth, that Ambassador McKinley, the Dean of the Foreign Service Corps that we heard from through testimony, is not telling the truth. Ambassador Yovanovitch is not telling the truth. At the end of the day, this is the Republican Party saying Donald Trump is the only person who speaks the truth in American politics. And we know from his history is replete with lies and deception on the American people. And he is actually fulfilling the warning that Gary Kasparov has left with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.